Welcome to the Estimating Desk. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here. Today, we're diving into a complete explainer on a tool that is honestly going to become your best friend, the Estimator version 1.2. As an RCDD and limited energy contractor, I can tell you firsthand that bidding Division 27 and 28 work using chaotic, disconnected spreadsheets, yeah, that's just a recipe for disaster. We aren't here today just to learn how to click buttons. We're here to see how this specific tool standardizes our entire workflow, enforces serious discipline, and ultimately protects this shop's profitability. All right, let's dive into this.
Now this quote right here brilliantly illustrates our core philosophy, right out of the gate. The tool handles arithmetic and structure, the human handles judgment. I literally want you to burn this into your memory. This software is going to calculate our overtime, it's going to size our crews, and it's going to enforce our margins to prevent complete spreadsheet chaos. But listen, it is not a final pricing authority. Your field experience, knowing the difference between a clean drop and a total nightmare of a pull, that is what actually builds the bid. You bring the judgment, the tool just does the math.
So here is our pre-flight checklist for today's explainer. Setting the job baseline, mastering the schedule math, building the BICSI scope, leveraging the materials library asset, and finally, overhead, margin, and review. Think of these not just as a generic agenda, but as our shop's strict protocol for avoiding disaster on every single bid.
Okay, Section 1, setting the job baseline and getting the foundation right. Let's get into it. A rock-solid bid starts way before we ever count a single cable. You might be looking at the project info and scope summary setup panel and thinking, oh, it's just basic data entry for project metadata. Project name, client, dates. But here is the kicker. Whatever you type into this scope summary, the exclusions and the note sections, that flows directly into the final client-facing proposal. There's no middleman here. So making sure this is perfectly accurate and professional right at step 1 is literally mandatory.
Once that project data is in, we have to define our labor. The tool forces us to strictly separate our cost rates, which is what we actually pay our techs, helpers, and foremen, from our sell rates, which is obviously what we bill the client. It tracks the gross margin on labor explicitly. And hey, do not overlook that $10 per hour vehicle adder. That multiplies across total field labor hours to amortize our trucks, our fuel, and our rolling stock tools. If we don't capture that per hour, we're basically paying for the fleet's gas right out of our own paychecks, and there's no way we're doing that.
Moving on to Section 2, mastering the schedule math. This is absolutely crucial, folks, because unrealistic schedules are exactly where margin goes to die.
This schedule engine and overtime mode configuration is our absolute ultimate defense mechanism against losing money on overly compressed timelines. You just input your target working days and your work week pattern, say 5 days at 8 hours or maybe 4 tens. The engine then takes all your scope hours and calculates exactly how large your crew needs to be to hit that deadline. If our baseline crew is 4 techs, but the math says otherwise, boom, the system immediately flags it as an accelerated schedule.
So what does this all mean in practice? Well, consider this scenario. What happens if the scope requires 14 techs to hit the client's deadline, but our shop only has 4 available? We've all been there, right? This tool forces us to confront that real-world resource gap right now, way before we ever issue the proposal. It literally stops us from blindly committing to a schedule we mathematically cannot staff.
And look, if we do have to accelerate, overtime math is brutal to calculate by hand. Here, you just select the jurisdiction. Under federal mode, the tool applies the time-and-a-half multiplier to anything over 40 hours a week. But look at California mode. It flawlessly calculates overtime for anything over 8 hours a day or 40 hours a week, plus double time for anything over 12 hours. We aren't guessing on a spreadsheet anymore. The engine handles all those complex jurisdictional rules completely automatically.
Now you might be wondering, what about jobs out of town? Toggling the job type to remote instantly opens up the auto calculations for travel. You plug in travel days each way, daily per diem per tech, hotel per night, and airfare. The engine takes the required crew size it just calculated, applies it to the project duration, and auto-computes your total travel costs. Uncalculated hotel rooms and, accidental steak dinners on per diem are a massive financial drain. This feature ensures they're fully baked into our direct costs from minute 1.
All right, Section 3, let's get into the meat of the bid, building the BICSI scope using the 000 to 1000 work breakdown structure. And quick note, we say limited energy now, because NEC 2026 made that the standard over low voltage, so we're adapting right here.
We build our scope using the strict BICSI work breakdown structure. You can see the full scale of it, running all the way from Section 000 for mobilization right down to Section 1000 for demobilization.
every single task you estimate gets assigned to one of these specific categories. Actually, it demands a specific home. This completely eliminates the guesswork of where labor hours belong and gives us an incredibly clear picture of where the project's costs are concentrated.
Within these key WBS sections, like 200 copper backbone, 400 horizontal, 700 testing, or 900 bonding and grounding, you add your line items, your quantities, and crucially, your hours per unit. This is exactly where your judgment comes in. Pulling Cat 6 in a drop ceiling open office has a vastly different productivity factor than pulling it through rigid conduit in a concrete correctional facility. The tool calculates the totals instantly, for sure, but the human must input the right hours based on the field reality.
Next up, Section 4, the Materials Library Asset. Scope is nothing without parts, and we are guarding our shop's catalog like a hawk.
This Materials Library interface lives entirely in your local browser database. It comes with an 80-item seed library of the most common limited energy materials, everything from plenum cables to patch panels to access control hardware, each with baseline pricing and default role assignments. You can pick items directly into your project, or, and this is a real game changer, if a supplier sends you a current quote, you can import that CSV right into the browser. It instantly populates your estimate and updates your catalog.
Now you absolutely got to pay close attention to this. The seed library carries baseline source prices from 2023. To prevent us from drastically underbidding using those outdated prices, the tool applies an inflation factor. This is a bulk multiplier, and the default is set to 1.10, which represents about 3 years of cumulative inflation, bringing us up to $2026 values. This bulk adjusts everything at calculation time. If you have a rock-solid current quote, you just override the source price. But man, this factor is an incredible safety net for ballpark estimating. All right, the final stretch, Section 5, Overhead, Margin, and Review. This is our final defense before we ever show a number to a client. Before we even think about applying markup, we have to capture any remaining expenses in the Other Direct Costs, or ODC, panel. This is where you manually add equipment rentals, like scissor lifts or fiber certifiers, and any specialty subcontractors. And hey, remember those remote travel costs the schedule engine auto-calculated for us? They perfectly stack right on top of these manual entries to give us our true total direct cost.
Okay, look at the difference here between markup and margin. This is where so many contractors just bleed cash. If you take $100 of cost and just slap a naive 20% markup on it, you sell for $120. But your actual profit margin on that 120 is only 16.7%. The estimator uses true margin form math. Price equals cost divided by 1 minus the margin percentage. You enter a 20% target margin, and it calculates a $125 sell price, ensuring you actually make the 20% profit you stated. It's a lifesaver.
So here are the final steps. Once your numbers are in, you check the summary total, review the visual cost composition chart to see your labor versus materials breakdown, and verify the embedded assumptions. Then, step 4 is completely non-negotiable. Export the JSON backup file. There is no cloud server here, folks. Your highly sensitive job cost data never leaves your machine, so you must save this file before printing the final PDF. Well, we've covered the baseline, the schedule engine, the BICSI scope, the materials library, and the exact math that protects our margins. As we've seen, the estimator provides the structure, and it flawlessly executes the math. So my final question to you is this. Are you ready to bring the critical judgment required to protect our bottom line on every single bid? I know you are. Let's get to work.